A black security guard in Chicago, exhausted from night shifts and weighed down by a massive debt to save his daughter's heart, encountered an elderly white man one biting snowstorm night. The man stood confused and alone inside the building he was guarding. Instead of sending him back out into the freezing darkness, he brought him home and cared for him. What he did not know was that this simple act of kindness would change their destinies, opening the door to a miracle neither he nor his daughter had ever dared to imagine. Sit back, because we have a story for you. It is fictional, yes, but somewhere in it you might just find a piece of your own life. From all of us at Memory Stories, welcome. The cold in Chicago in winter was the kind you never got used to. Desmond Hayes had lived in this city his whole life and had never once gotten used to it. He had simply learned to move differently inside it, the way you learned to walk on ice carefully with your weight distributed low, expecting the ground to shift beneath you at any moment. He had worked the overnight security shift at Meridian Tower for some time, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when a coworker called in sick and the company needed someone to cover. The pay was modest before taxes. He had done the math so many times it had stopped feeling like math and started feeling like breathing. Just a number that existed in his body, constant and slightly painful, the way a healing bruise hurt when you pressed it. $82,000. That was what Dr. Harlan Reed had told him back in the fall, sitting across from him in his office with a manila folder open on the desk between them. After insurance, after every discount the hospital could reasonably apply, that was what it would cost to fix the hole in his daughter's heart. Not a metaphorical hole, an actual one, a structural defect in the wall between Layla's 2 lower chambers, present since birth. It had been manageable for years through medication and careful monitoring, but no longer. The heart was compensating now, working harder than it should, and compensation had limits. Doctor. Reed had used the phrase progressive deterioration, and Desmond had sat across from him with his hands folded in his lap and his face very still, letting the words land on him like stones. He had not cried until he was in his car. He had not told Layla until he had time to look up every payment plan, every charity, every financial assistance program he could find. He told his daughter the same way he tried to tell her everything, clearly, without softening it so much that it became a lie. Your heart needs surgery. It will cost money we do not have yet. We are going to figure it out. Layla nodded in the serious, quiet way she had, a way that was both very adult and very much her age at the same time, and said, "Okay, what do you need me to do?" That was his daughter. That had always been his daughter. One particularly cold, snowy night, the temperature outside had dropped sharply before accounting for wind chill. Desmond knew this because the weather app on his phone had sent him an alert right as he was settling into his shift, and he had noted it the way he noted most things these days, practically filing it away as a data point that might matter later. The building was empty by late evening. It usually was. The last of the late workers had left, badges swiped out, elevator descending, lobby door releasing them into the dark and the cold. Desmond had watched them go on the monitor at his station, figures in heavy coats and scarves pulling tight against the wind as they dispersed onto the sidewalk. Then the building was his. Or, rather, he was the building's. He had a routine for the quiet hours. First circuit of the ground floor, checking doors and storage closets and the maintenance corridor that ran behind the elevators. Coffee from the small maker he kept behind his station. Reading from a thick novel Layla had left on the kitchen table and recommended. Lately, it had been a story about a woman building a railroad through impossible terrain, and Desmond had found himself thinking about it during the day, which was the sign of a good book. Second circuit, then the long pull of hours that was just vigilance and quiet, and the distant sounds of the city doing whatever cities did when they thought no one was watching. He was on his first circuit when he found him. He had come around the corner of the east corridor, the one that led past the loading dock entrance toward the back stairwell, and he almost walked past him entirely because his brain registered him wrong at first. As a shadow, as a piece of furniture he had forgotten was there, as something that belonged. The man was sitting on the narrow bench along the east wall. The bench was there for building staff waiting to be buzzed in from the loading dock. It was not comfortable by design, more of a ledge than a seat, but he was sitting on it with his hands resting on his knees and his eyes looking at the floor with an expression that was not distress exactly, but something adjacent to it, something patient and lost at the same time. He was old. White hair that had once probably been thick now thinned to a soft, fine layer across his scalp. He wore a gray wool overcoat that was good quality but not warm enough for tonight, not nearly warm enough, and the collar of a dress shirt was visible beneath it. No tie. His shoes were leather-soled, the old-fashioned kind that did nothing against ice. His hands resting on his knees were the hands of a man who had used them, thick-knuckled, scarred across the backs in the small ways that accumulated over decades. He was not a vagrant. Desmond had developed an eye for the specific weight that homelessness put on people, the way it showed not just in clothes, but in posture, in the quality of stillness, a kind of constant bracing against uncertainty. This man's stillness was different. He looked like someone who had sat down to wait for something and then forgotten what he was waiting for. Desmond stopped. He did not reach for the radio at his hip immediately. "Sir," he said. The man looked up slowly, the way people looked up when they had been somewhere very far away in their heads. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, and they found Desmond's face and settled there with a focus that was slightly off, like a camera that could not quite lock onto its subject. "The building is closed," Desmond said. His voice was level, professional, not unkind, but not soft either. He had learned early on that softness without firmness just created confusion. "It has been closed since evening. How did you get in?" The man looked around as though verifying this information by examining his surroundings. Then he looked back at him. "I know the code," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with a cadence that suggested he had once been a man who spoke precisely and expected to be heard. "For the side entrance. I have known it a long time. The side entrance is staff-only access. I know." He seemed to register some incongruity in this, but not be especially troubled by it. "I was trying to find my office, floor 23. I worked there for—" He paused. Something moved across his face, a searching quality like a hand feeling along a dark shelf for a long time. Floor 23 was currently occupied by a mid-sized law firm that had been in the building for some years. Before that, Desmond did not know. He had not been here then. "Can I see some identification, sir?" He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a wallet, old leather, soft with age. He opened it and looked at it for a moment before handing it over, like a man handing over something he was not entirely sure contained what he thought it did. The driver's license read Edwin Thomas Hargrove. "Thank you, Mr. Hargrove." Desmond handed it back. "Do you have a phone? Someone I can call for you?" He shook his head. "You came here without a phone." "I forget it sometimes," he said. "I have been forgetting things." He said this with a strange equanimity, not as a complaint or an apology, but as a simple observation, the way you might say the weather had been odd lately. Desmond looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the east corridor window, which faced the alley between the building and the parking structure next door. He could not see much through the frosted glass, but he could see the snow, heavy, steady, thick flakes that had been falling and showed no sign of stopping. The forecast had called for significant accumulation by morning. He unclipped his radio and called it into the company's overnight dispatch. Then he called the Chicago Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher was apologetic and efficient. There were accidents and other calls ahead of him. Someone would get there when they could. He tried the city's senior services helpline, automated menu, then a recorded message saying the after-hours line was experiencing high volume. He stood in the corridor with his radio in one hand and his phone in the other and looked at Edwin Hargrove, who was still sitting on the bench with his hands on his knees, watching him with patient, mildly interested eyes. Outside, heavy snow, no wind shelter between here and the nearest bus stop. He thought about what it meant to leave him here alone while he finished his circuit. He thought about what it meant to send him out into that. He thought about his mother's voice years ago when Desmond was a boy and they had found an old man sitting on their stoop in the summer heat, confused and dehydrated, and his mother had brought him inside and given him water and sat with him until his daughter came. His mother had said, "You do not walk past people who need help, Desmond. You just do not. That is not something we do." "Mr. Hargrove," he said, "my shift ends in the morning. You are welcome to stay warm here until then, and I will help you reach your family when I go off duty. But I want to be honest with you. It might be a long wait and this bench is not comfortable. My apartment is not far from here. I can get you somewhere warm, a real bed, and we can sort out contacting your family in the morning when it is daylight and the phones are easier. That is your choice, though. I am not going to push you." He considered this with the same unhurried seriousness he seemed to bring to everything. "Your apartment?" he repeated. "Yes, sir. I live alone with my daughter. She is a teenager." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "I have not been somewhere that felt like a home in a while." He said it simply, without self-pity, just as a piece of information. "I think I would like that, if it is not a trouble." "It is not a trouble," Desmond said, and meant it, and did not entirely understand why he meant it as completely as he did. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a 6-story building on South Wabash. The kind of building that had been put up decades ago and had aged in the honest, unremarkable way that working-class buildings aged, without elegance but without pretension either. Just walls and floors and windows that did what walls and floors and windows were supposed to do. Desmond had lived here for some years. When he had first moved in, right after the divorce, he had stood in the empty living room with a young Layla on his hip and a single box of kitchen items at his feet, and he had thought, "This is enough. This can be enough." And then he had gone about making it enough. The painting Layla had done at a young age, abstract swirls of orange and yellow she called sunrise from a moving train, hung above the couch. The small shelf of serious-spined library books by the window. The deep orange rug in front of the radiator that he had found at a thrift store and that had, for reasons he could not entirely explain, made him feel for the first time like the apartment was actually his. A collection of small potted plants on the windowsill that Layla had named and talked to with an earnestness she had never outgrown. He had a city of small intentions, and it was home. He unlocked the door. The hallway light was on. Layla kept it on when Desmond was working nights. Even though he had told her many times she did not need to stay up, she never listened. Desmond suspected this was a form of love, Layla's specific and stubborn variety. "Dad?" Layla's voice from the kitchen, even before the door was fully open. "It is me." Desmond stepped in, then held the door for Edwin Hargrove, who followed him carefully over the threshold, pausing to wipe his shoes on the mat with a meticulousness that seemed automatic, deep-grooved by long habit. Layla appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing an oversized gray sweatshirt and flannel pants, her hair in 2 braids she had probably done herself when she was supposed to be going to sleep. She had Desmond's eyes, large, observant, slow to commit to an expression until they had assessed a situation fully, and she was using them now, taking in the old man standing in their entryway with his gray wool coat and his careful posture. She looked at her father, then back at him, then at her father again. "This is Mr. Hargrove," Desmond said. "He got turned around tonight, and it is too cold outside to sort it out until morning. He is going to stay with us." Layla's face completed its evaluation. She stepped forward. "Hi," she said. "I am Layla. Are you hungry? We have leftover chicken and there is bread if you want a sandwich or something. Dad always says you think better when you are not hungry." Edwin Hargrove looked at Layla Hayes for a moment with an expression that was hard to read, something between surprise and recognition, though of what Desmond could not tell. "A sandwich sounds very good," he said. "Thank you, Layla." They ate at the small kitchen table, Layla and Edwin and Desmond, who had poured himself coffee because he had more hours of his shift to technically still be on call for, even though he had notified dispatch of his location and situation. The snow pressed soft and thick against the kitchen window. The radiator ticked and hissed in its cheerful, unreliable way. Edwin ate methodically, carefully, the way people ate when they were genuinely hungry but had been raised to never let it show. Layla had cut the sandwich into triangles, which he seemed to find quietly pleasing. Desmond watched him and tried to decide what he was seeing. He was not, he thought, simply confused. It was more layered than that. Moments of clarity sat inside a larger fog, like islands in low cloud. When he was present, he was fully present, attentive, precise, the eyes sharp and alive. When the fog came in, he would go slightly still, his gaze tracking some interior distance, and then he would return without apparent distress, like a man who had simply stepped out and come back. "What do you do, Mr. Hargrove?" Layla asked. She had propped her chin on her hand and was watching him with the frank curiosity she brought to most things she found interesting. "I build things," he said, then amended himself. "I built things. Buildings mostly. Started in Chicago." He paused, seeming to sort through time. "Your father works in one of mine, Meridian Tower." Layla's eyes went to Desmond, then back. "You built Meridian Tower." He described the project with quiet pride. "I knew every beam in that building before it went up. I could tell you why each structural decision was made, going back to the soil tests." A small, private smile. "I could not tell you what I had for breakfast some mornings, but I could tell you that." "That is interesting," Layla said thoughtfully. "Our teacher says memory is like a filing system, and different kinds of memories get stored differently. So, like you can lose some files, but not others." "Your teacher is correct," Edwin said. "It is a strange thing to experience from the inside." "Does it scare you?" Layla asked. "It is all right," Desmond began. "It is all right," Edwin said. He thought about the question with visible seriousness, which was the correct response to any question Layla asked. She did not ask things she was not actually wondering about. "It did at first. Now it mostly makes me sad. There are things I want to hold on to, and I can feel them going slippery. People's faces, conversations." He looked down at his plate. "My wife's voice. I have lost most of that." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. The snow against the window and the radiator and the particular silence of three people sitting with something true. "I am sorry," Layla said. She said it without performance, just two words carrying the actual weight of the sentiment behind them. Edwin looked up at her. "Thank you," he said. "I think you mean that." "I do." Desmond found his name that night. After Edwin was settled in his bedroom, he had changed the sheets and found an extra blanket from the hall closet, and Edwin had thanked him with the particular courtesy of a man for whom gratitude was a formal act. And after Layla was in her room finally, and the apartment had gone quiet, Desmond sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and typed, "Edwin Hargrove, Chicago." The results were immediate and extensive. Edwin Thomas Hargrove, founder and chairman emeritus of Hargrove Development Group, one of the Midwest's largest privately held real estate development firms. Hargrove Development Group managed a portfolio of hundreds of commercial and residential properties across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Estimated net worth in the billions. Hargrove was credited with transforming large sections of Chicago's downtown commercial district and was considered a significant figure in the city's modern architectural history. There was a photograph from a ribbon-cutting ceremony some years back. The man in the photograph was younger, standing straight, dressed in a dark suit with a hard hat held loosely at his side, smiling at whoever was cutting the ribbon. A smile that was genuine and slightly impatient. The smile of a man who was proud of what had been built and ready to move on to the next thing. The same watery blue eyes, the same thick-knuckled hands. Desmond read the article through twice. Then he closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen for a while, his coffee going cold in front of him. He thought about calling someone right now, finding a number for Philip Hargrove, the son mentioned in several of the articles as the current operating head of the company. He could call him now. He also thought about the look on Edwin Hargrove's face when he had said, "I have not been somewhere that felt like a home in a while." He sat with both of those things. Then he went to check on the man sleeping in his bedroom, just a brief pause at the door, listening, and then he lay down on the couch with a blanket pulled up and stared at the ceiling and waited for morning. He was not fully asleep when he heard it. The sound he had heard was a door, not the front door, not yet. Just footsteps in the hallway between the bedroom and the living room. Slow and deliberate, the kind of footsteps made by someone trying not to wake the household and failing. Desmond was upright before he had fully processed being awake. He had developed this capacity over years of overnight shifts, the body learning to go from sleep to operational with no intermediate stage, no fog of its own. He swung his legs off the couch and stood. Edwin Hargrove was in the hallway. He was dressed as he had been when he went to sleep, shirt and trousers, no shoes, his socks sliding slightly on the linoleum, and he was moving toward the front door with a purposeful, unhurried stride. His hand was reaching for the deadbolt. "Mr. Hargrove." He stopped. He turned. The expression on his face was not distress and not clarity. It was something else, something Desmond had to look at for a moment before he understood it, the expression of a man who was somewhere else entirely, present in a different year, a different house, a different life. His eyes were open, and they found Desmond's face, but what they saw was not Desmond Hayes in an apartment on South Wabash. "Margaret," he said. His voice was soft, almost wondering. "Margaret, I said I would be back by evening." Desmond stood very still. He had done the non-emergency call. He had looked up his name. He had read paragraphs about his wife, Eleanor Hargrove, deceased some years back. And now he was standing in his own hallway in the early morning hours looking at a man who was trying to come home to someone who had been gone for some time. The deadbolt was a turn-and-lift mechanism. If he got it open, he would be in the stairwell in seconds and then outside. And outside was black ice on the steps. He did not reach for him. He had read enough in the nights when Layla had been in the hospital for monitoring, and Desmond had sat in waiting room chairs with his phone and read everything he could about everything. He had read enough to know that you did not grab, you did not startle. You got between them and the door quietly, the way you would redirect a sleepwalker. He stepped to his left, casual, unhurried. He positioned himself between Edwin and the door without appearing to position himself anywhere. "You made it back early," he said. He kept his voice at the same register Edwin had used, soft, unhurried, meeting him where he was. "It is still late. Come sit down." He looked at him. The expression on his face shifted, complicated itself, something moving through it like a weather change, fast and subtle. "Sit down in the kitchen," Desmond said. "I was going to make tea." A pause. He looked at the door, then back at him. Something in his face was working. Desmond could see it. Some interior process, some part of him that still ran the calculations even when the fog was heavy. "All right," he said at last. Desmond made tea. He made it slowly, deliberately, the ritual of it. The kettle filling, the burner clicking on, the 2 mugs set out. He kept his movements visible, unhurried. The kitchen light was the low under-cabinet light, warm and undemanding. Edwin sat down at the table. He folded his hands on the surface in front of him and looked at them. Desmond could not tell, watching him, whether he was remembering where he was or still somewhere else or in some intermediate territory between the two. When the tea was ready, he set a mug in front of him and sat across. They drank in silence. The radiator ticked. "Dad!" Layla was in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing her flannel pants and the gray sweatshirt, and her braids were loose at the ends from sleep, but she was not alarmed. Desmond looked at his daughter, who had spent the last months going to cardiology appointments and listening to doctors explain the mechanics of her own heart's failure with a gravity that no teenager should have to carry. And what he saw was the particular calm of a person who had already learned that certain kinds of nights happened and you got through them. "Everything okay?" Layla asked. "Fine," Desmond said. "Mr. Hargrove could not sleep. Go back to bed." Layla looked at Edwin, assessed him the way she assessed everything, quietly and without rush, and then nodded. "Okay." She looked back at her father, and in the look was something that communicated without words. "I know you have this." And then she went. Desmond sat in the kitchen until Edwin's tea was gone and his eyes had found their focus again. He watched the clarity come back in the way he had seen it happen before, gradually, like a tide retreating from fog, the gaze sharpening, the hands settling differently on the table. He looked at him. He looked at the kitchen around him. Desmond could see him placing himself. "I am sorry," he said. His voice was different now, fully his own again, the precise and careful voice he had heard at the dinner table. "I am sorry. I do not know. You do not need to apologize, Desmond said. I was going somewhere. You were? He looked at the door across the apartment. Then he looked down at his tea mug. I thought... A pause. A careful, measured pause, the kind that assembled something difficult. I thought Margaret was waiting for me somewhere. I could not. I could see it clearly. The address, the street. I knew the way. She sounds like someone who is worth going back to, Desmond said. He was quiet for a moment. She was the most patient person I've ever known. She was patient with me in ways I did not deserve. When he went back to bed, Desmond stood at the kitchen table and called the non-emergency line again and reported the incident, adding to the log he had been building. Behavior, resolution, current status, calm. He also called a 24-hour nurse advisory line that a friend at work had once mentioned, the kind hospitals maintained for people who needed clinical guidance without an emergency room, and spoke for some minutes with a tired, kind woman who explained what he was seeing in terms that were practical and unsentimental and helpful. He wrote it down in a notes app on his phone. Then he went back to the couch, pulled the blanket up, and lay very still for a while, listening to the apartment breathe around him. He did not remember any of it in the morning. Desmond could see that immediately. The way he came to the kitchen table with his customary careful courtesy, the way his eyes carried no shadow of the previous night. He did not remind him. It was not, he had decided somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, information that would help him. It was only information that would grieve him. What he did instead was check the deadbolt. He took the spare key off the hook by the door and put it in his coat pocket. And he noted in his phone that this was something to tell his son. Not as an accusation, but as a fact. As a piece of clinical information that Philip Hargrove needed to have. Whenever he finally reached him, he added it to the log. He called the company in the morning. The main line at Hargrove Development Group opened at regular business hours. He was patched through to an executive assistant who took his name and information in a carefully neutral voice and said someone would be in touch. No one called back that day. He tried again the next morning. This time he was told that the family was aware of the situation and was making arrangements. Could he please expect a call shortly? No call came. On the third morning, he sent an email to the address listed publicly on the company website for Philip Hargrove's office. It was thorough and factual. Who he was, where he worked, what had happened that snowy night, the current state of his father's health as best he could assess it, including the incident log he had been keeping, and his contact information. He received an out-of-office reply saying Philip Hargrove was traveling and would respond when he returned. He did not know when he was returning. Meanwhile, Edwin Hargrove was in his apartment. He settled into it the way old buildings settled into their foundations, slowly and in a way that eventually seemed embedded. He was not a difficult guest. He made his bed every morning with a military precision that Desmond suspected had nothing to do with the military and everything to do with an ingrained personal discipline. He ate what was in front of him without comment. He did not need to be entertained. What he did was talk to Layla. This had begun on the second morning when Desmond had come into the kitchen and found Edwin at the kitchen table with Layla's math textbook open between them, a pencil in his hand. Layla was frowning at the page. "I do not understand why this rule works," she was saying. "It just says the formula is this, but not why." "Because most textbooks are written by people who understand the subject but have forgotten what it felt like not to," Edwin said. He turned the book so it faced her and drew a small diagram in the margin, a clean, confident line drawing. "Let me show you the why." Desmond stood in the doorway of his own kitchen and watched an elderly billionaire who had forgotten most of his own family explain quadratic functions to his daughter, and he felt something he did not immediately have a name for, something that had both warmth and sorrow in it at the same time. "Do you want coffee?" he asked, and they both looked up, and neither of them had realized he was there. On another day, Desmond took Edwin and Layla to a cardiology appointment that had been scheduled before any of this began. He had not planned to bring him. He had planned to leave him at the apartment with the door locked and his phone number written on a notepad by the kitchen. But when he had mentioned it at breakfast, Edwin had simply set down his toast and said, "Would you like company?" And he had not had a good reason to say no. The waiting room at the pediatric cardiology clinic had the particular smell of all medical waiting rooms, antiseptic beneath something meant to be warm but not quite achieving it, and the particular quality of time that moved strangely in them, too slow and too fast at once. Layla was in with Dr. Reed's associate for a scheduled echo. Desmond and Edwin sat in the plastic chairs along the wall. He had not meant to tell him. He had not been telling people beyond the bare minimum. His mother, his closest friend from work, nobody else. The number was too large to say without the conversation becoming about the number, and he was tired of conversations that became about the number. But they had been sitting in silence for some time, and Edwin had been watching a young father across the room trying to keep a toddler entertained with a phone. And he had said without preamble, "How long has she had the condition?" "Since birth," Desmond said. "We have been managing it, and now it needs a surgical repair." It was not a question exactly. He had understood something from context or from the setting or from some still operational piece of his engineer's mind that assembled data into structure even when the data was human. "Yes, what does it cost?" He told him. He said the number plainly because there was something about him, the quality of his attention, the absence of performance in it, that made plain the only appropriate register. He did not react visibly. He sat with the number for a moment the way he sat with most things, without hurry, without theater. Then he said, "Are you managing?" "I am working on it." "That is not the same thing." "No," he said, "it is not." He did not offer anything. He did not reach for his checkbook or his phone or the language of problem-solving. He simply sat with him in the waiting room and looked at the door through which Layla had disappeared, and the quality of his presence, steady and unhurried and entirely without agenda, was more useful than most things people said. When Layla came out, she stopped in front of Edwin first. The echo looked stable. She reported with the matter-of-fact competence of a teenager who had learned the vocabulary of her own medical condition the way other kids learned the vocabulary of sports. "Dr. Reed says we stay on schedule." "Good," Edwin said. "That is good." Layla looked at him. "You were worried a little." Layla nodded, accepting this as appropriate. "Dad worries more than he shows too," she said. "It is a whole thing in our family." Desmond started to say Layla's name in the tone that meant that is enough of that. But Edwin had already laughed. A real one, quiet and surprised. The sound of someone genuinely caught off guard, and the moment passed into something good. He had been an engineer before he was a developer. This came out over the course of several days. Gradually, the way things came out when someone was remembering as they talked, rather than reporting. He had studied civil engineering at the University of Illinois, graduated some years back, worked for a large firm before deciding that he wanted to build things himself, rather than be a component in someone else's building process. "The first building I owned was terrible," he told Layla one afternoon. They were sitting in the living room, Layla doing homework, Edwin with a cup of tea. A 6-unit residential on the north side. Everything went wrong that could go wrong. The contractor I hired had misrepresented his experience. The permits took longer than projected. A pipe burst in the dead of winter. "What did you do?" "I showed up every morning," he said. "That was all I knew how to do. Show up, look at what was broken, figure out how to fix it, and go home and not think about it because if I thought about it too much I would become paralyzed." He paused. "I think that is how I built everything after that, including the things that were not buildings." Layla was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking about this. "Including your family." Edwin looked at her with something that might have been pain or might have been a very old, very settled form of pain. "Yes," he said, "including my family, with less success there." "What went wrong with your family?" Layla asked. "Layla," Desmond said from the kitchen. "It is an honest question," Edwin said. He was quiet for a moment, turning his tea mug slowly in his hands. "I showed up for the buildings," he said finally. "I did not always show up for the people. My son Philip is very capable, very accomplished. He learned from watching me that capability and accomplishment were what mattered because that was what I showed him." He looked down at his tea. His mother, Eleanor, she tried to balance it. She was better at the human parts than I was. After she died, I think Philip and I both realized how much of the structure she had been holding up, and neither of us knew how to repair it. He said this without bitterness, just the quiet assessment of an engineer looking at something that had failed and noting accurately and without ego where the design had been flawed. Layla put down her pencil. She looked at him the way she looked at things that mattered. "I think you would have shown up more if you had known how," she said. "I do not think you were trying to be bad at it." Edwin looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were very clear in that moment, fully present. No fog. "No," he said softly, "I was not." On a Saturday, Desmond walked with Edwin to Meridian Tower. It was not an official errand. It was simply something he had asked for quietly on a morning when he had been looking out of the kitchen window toward downtown with a focused, distant expression. "Could we go by the building sometime, just to see it?" It was a clear day. Cold, but not brutal, the kind of winter day Chicago occasionally offered as a concession. They took the Red Line and walked the last few blocks. Layla had stayed home. They stood on the sidewalk across from the building's main entrance. The glass facade caught the winter light the way he had once described it would, the east exposure, the morning angle, and Edwin stood with his hands in his coat pockets and his head slightly tilted and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "The foundation footings go down deep," he said finally. "We had a geological surprise, a layer the soil test had not predicted. Old fill compressed over decades, but not reliably. We had to re-engineer the load distribution." A pause. "It took extra weeks and cost more than we had planned on. The bank wanted to renegotiate." "What did you do?" "I did not tell them until the solution was already in place," he said with a trace of something that might have been old satisfaction. "By the time they found out, the problem was solved. There was nothing to renegotiate." Desmond looked at him. "That seems like a significant risk." "It was. It was also the right call." He paused. "The project manager's name was—" He stopped. His brow furrowed slightly. "He was from Gary. Moved to Chicago some years back. He had 3 daughters." Another pause. Longer. "I cannot remember his name." He said this the way he said most things about the gaps, not with devastation but with a kind of precise, clear-eyed sorrow, as though cataloging the loss rather than collapsing under it. "He would remember you," Desmond said. Edwin looked at him. "You think so? You just told me he had 3 daughters and moved from Gary. Nobody remembers details like that about people they were not paying attention to." He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked back at the building. "I paid attention," he said. "I just paid attention to the wrong things first." The trouble with the neighbors was small and over quickly, but it left a mark. Mrs. Okafor on the second floor had seen Edwin coming in with Desmond on an early day and had stopped Desmond in the stairwell the following morning. Not unkindly, but with the particular efficiency of someone who had decided to handle a thing before it became complicated. "Who is the man?" she asked. "A friend of the family," Desmond said. "He is staying for a few days." Mrs. Okafor looked at him, the kind of look that communicated she was deciding whether to believe this, and then nodded and went on. But by that afternoon, Desmond had received a text from the building manager, a man named Dennis, who lived on the 6th floor and managed the property part-time for the owner, asking him to stop by. He went that evening. Dennis was apologetic and awkward in the way of a man who had been asked to do something he did not entirely want to do. Someone had noted the presence of an unfamiliar older white man in the building. There had been questions. The building had a policy about extended guests. "He will be gone by the end of the month," Desmond said. "His family is making arrangements. I am not trying to—" "I know," Desmond said. He kept his voice even. He had long experience keeping his voice even in rooms where the question being asked was not the question that was meant. "It is fine. I understand the policy." He walked back down the stairs with the particular straight-backed quality he put on when he needed it. The quality his mother had modeled and that he had practiced until it was automatic. Inside, something tightened and then deliberately loosened. He had done nothing wrong. He would not spend energy in the shape of guilt he had not earned. What he found when he got back to the apartment was Edwin at the kitchen table helping Layla prep for a history exam, and Layla saying something that made him laugh and the kitchen warm and the plants on the windowsill quietly alive. He hung his coat on the hook and went to pour himself water and decided it was enough, more than enough. There was an afternoon when Desmond came home from a grocery run and found the apartment silent. Edwin's coat was still on the hook. He had not gone anywhere. He looked through the apartment and found him in Layla's room. Layla was at school. He was sitting in the small chair by the window, the one Layla used for reading, and he was looking out at the alley below, and he was crying. Not dramatically, not in the way of a man falling apart, just quietly, steadily. Tears moving down his face with a slow regularity, like something that had been holding for a long time had found a small release valve. He did not hear him in the doorway. Desmond stood there for a moment and then quietly withdrew and went to the kitchen and put the kettle on and took down 2 mugs and waited. He came out some minutes later. He sat down at the kitchen table. Desmond put tea in front of him without saying anything. He wrapped both hands around the mug. He looked out the kitchen window at the gray sky over South Wabash. "Eleanor loved winter," he said eventually. "I always hated it. She said I was wrong, that there was more beauty in things that were stripped down. You could see the structure better." He paused. "I've been thinking about that lately. I think she was right about a lot of things I was wrong about." Desmond sat down across from him. In the end, he just said, "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was ordinary," Edwin said with great gentleness. "She was completely ordinary, and I spent too much time around extraordinary things to understand what that was worth." Philip Hargrove arrived on a weekday. It was some days after the night Desmond had found his father in the East Corridor. He was home between shifts. The buzzer sounded. He looked at the intercom screen and saw a man in a dark coat standing in the vestibule below. He pressed the button. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, my name is Philip Hargrove. I believe you have my father." He buzzed him in. He came up the stairs with a woman in a charcoal blazer who carried a leather portfolio and who introduced herself very briefly as Catherine Lowe, legal counsel. Philip Hargrove was perhaps in his mid-40s with his father's height but none of his father's stillness. He moved through the doorway with the controlled, deliberate energy of a man who scheduled his time in 15-minute increments and resented unscheduled variables. He had gray beginning at his temples and the kind of tan that came from somewhere warm and recent. He took in the apartment in a single practiced sweep of a glance, the kind of glance that assessed and categorized. Desmond recognized it because he had been assessed by glances like that before. He knew what it was measuring him against, and he knew the calculation it was doing, and he knew the answer it was likely arriving at. Edwin was in the living room. He had heard the buzzer and come out from the kitchen, and he stood now near the couch with his hands loose at his sides, watching his son walk into the room with an expression that Desmond found almost unbearable to look at directly. It was the expression of a man who had wanted something from this moment for a long time and was already preparing himself not to get it. "Dad?" Philip's voice was calibrated, warm enough to perform concern, controlled enough not to give away the effort. "Philip, we have been looking for you." "I know," Edwin said. "It took you some time." A very brief tension crossed Philip's face. Then he turned to Desmond. "Mr. Hayes." He extended his hand. Desmond shook it. His grip was firm and impersonal, the handshake of a man who had shaken thousands of hands and had stopped experiencing any of them as individual. "I appreciate you taking care of my father during a complicated situation." "He needed somewhere warm," Desmond said. "Of course." He paused, and Desmond could see him deciding something. A small decision visible in the way his shoulders very slightly shifted. "I want to be transparent with you. My father is in a medically and legally complex situation. There are guardianship considerations given his cognitive. I am standing right here, Philip," Edwin said. Philip turned to his father. The calibration in his voice shifted, became something that was almost gentle but kept its distance from it. "Dad, we need to talk about what comes next. There are care options we have been researching. Very well-regarded facilities." "Facilities," Edwin said. "People who are trained to handle my—" Edwin said, and his voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it that Desmond had not heard before, something from very far back, some older, harder version of him speaking through the fog. "My name, Philip, is Edwin Hargrove. I founded and built the company that you run. I designed half the buildings in your portfolio. I am having some difficulties with my memory. That is not the same thing as ceasing to be a person. The room was very quiet. Catherine Lowe was looking at the middle distance with the trained neutrality of someone who had witnessed this kind of conversation before and had been specifically advised not to react to it. Philip turned to Desmond, and something changed in how he was looking at him. Desmond had seen this change too, the shifting from assessment to accusation, the narrowing of eyes, the slight hardening of jaw. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "I have to ask you directly. Have you formed any expectation regarding my father's estate? Any discussions about financial arrangements?" Desmond looked at him for a long moment without speaking. He thought about all the things he could say. He thought about the night he had given up his bed. He thought about the groceries he had bought for extra days without anyone asking him to. He thought about sitting across from Edwin in the kitchen while he talked about Eleanor and about Layla bent over her math book while Edwin drew diagrams in the margins with patient, deliberate care. "No," he said, "because you should understand. I found an old man alone in a building in a snowstorm," Desmond said. His voice was quiet and completely flat and did not waver. "I did not know who he was. I took him somewhere safe because that was what you do when a person needs help. I have been trying to reach you for some time." He paused. "I do not want anything from you, Mr. Hargrove, but I want you to understand that your father has been treated with dignity in this house, and that is not something I need to defend." Philip opened his mouth. "She is right," Edwin's voice from near the couch. He had lowered himself to sit on the arm of it, as though he needed the physical steadiness. "He is completely right, Philip, and you should be ashamed of the question you just asked." Philip's jaw tightened. "He fed me," Edwin said. "He gave me his bedroom. His daughter sat with me every morning and treated me like I had something worth saying. In these days in this apartment I have been treated with more simple human decency." He stopped. Something moved across his face, and for a moment the fog came in, and then it retreated, and he looked at his son clearly. "I am not a problem to be resolved. I am not a liability to be managed. I am your father, and I am still here, and I would like to be spoken to accordingly." The room held its silence. Then Layla's key turned in the front door lock. She came in with her backpack over one shoulder and her coat already half off the way she always came in, moving efficiently through the ritual of arrival. Coat on hook, backpack by the door, shoes by the mat. She registered the two strangers in the living room with a brief assessing pause. "Hi," she said. Then to Edwin, "We got our tests back today. I got a 94 on the functions unit." Edwin's face changed. Whatever hardness had been in it from the confrontation dissolved. 94, he said. "How did you miss the other 6 points?" "Careless arithmetic in the last problem," Layla said, dropping onto the couch beside him. "I knew the method. I rushed at the end." "You always know more than you demonstrate when you rush," he said. "Take the extra 2 minutes." I know. Philip Hargrove was watching this exchange with an expression that Desmond could not fully categorize. Something complex was happening in his face. Something that might have been grief or envy or something between the two. They left that evening without Edwin. It had not been a clean resolution. There had been more conversation, legal considerations, logistics. Philip's measured insistence that arrangements needed to be made. Edwin's quiet but consistent refusal to be made an arrangement. Catherine Lowe had said little and taken many notes. At some point, Desmond had gone to the kitchen and stayed there because he understood that this was not his negotiation to conduct, and that the most useful thing he could do was not be in the room for it. Before he left, Philip Hargrove paused in the doorway. He looked at Desmond with an expression that had lost some of its earlier calculation. He did not know what had replaced it exactly, something less certain of itself. "We will be in touch," he said. "All right," Desmond said. He paused. He seemed to be deciding whether to say something else. Then he did. "He does seem more himself than I expected." Desmond looked at him. "He has always been himself," he said. "He is just in a place where people see him that way." Philip Hargrove looked at him for a moment, and Desmond thought perhaps something landed. Perhaps it did not. Then he left. The call came the next morning. Desmond was still in the apartment. He had taken a personal day, one of the few he had accumulated, because he was tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. The number on his phone was Meridian Tower's internal facilities line. He knew it by reflex. "Mr. Hayes." The voice belonged to his supervisor, Glenn Havford, a man he respected for his fairness and did not particularly like for his caution. "I need you to come in for a meeting this afternoon. Building management wants to discuss an incident report." "Which incident report?" A pause. "The one from that snowy night." He went in. Edwin was in the apartment with Layla, who had come straight home from school without being asked. Desmond had written his phone number on a notepad and taped it to the refrigerator and said, "I will be back soon." The meeting was in the third-floor conference room that building management used for tenant matters. Glenn was there and the building's property manager, a woman named Sandra Phelps, whom Desmond had spoken to perhaps a handful of times. There was a printed document on the table, several pages. He could see the heading from where he stood before he sat down. Incident Documentation Review. Sandra Phelps spoke first. She was efficient and not unkind, but also not especially warm, the register of someone conducting a process and intending to complete it correctly. "Mr. Hayes, we have received information that on that snowy night an unauthorized individual was found on the premises and was subsequently taken off-site by a member of our security staff. We are here to review your documentation of that event." "I have the log here," Desmond said. He had printed it. Pages with time-stamped entries from the moment he had found Edwin to the moment he had left the building, police non-emergency call reference numbers, dispatch notification, and a summary of his attempts over the following days to reach his next of kin. He slid it across the table. Sandra Phelps read it. Glenn read it over her shoulder. They were quiet for a moment. "You called the police and dispatch before removing him from the building," she said. "Yes, and the camera footage will corroborate the timeline." "Yes." He had checked this before he came. He had stood at his station that morning and pulled the footage himself and watched the timestamps and confirmed that everything he had logged matched what the cameras showed. Sandra set the papers down. She looked at them for a moment in the way of a person thinking through something they had prepared to say, but were now reconsidering. Then she said, "The individual you assisted has been identified as a major Hargrove Development Group stakeholder. We want to make sure that there is no—" She paused. "That the building's interests are clearly documented in this." Desmond understood what was being said. He had understood it from the moment Glenn had called. What was being said was, "We are not accusing you of anything, but we are creating a record that documents we asked the question so that if anything comes of this later, we can demonstrate we were diligent." "There is nothing to document that is not in that log," he said. "I found an elderly man alone in the building during a snowstorm. I followed protocol, reported it, was unable to reach his family or emergency services within a reasonable time frame, and made a judgment call based on the conditions. I have records of every step." Glenn cleared his throat. "There will be a note in your file about the deviation from standard on-site protocol." "All right," Desmond said. "It is not a disciplinary action," he added quickly. "It is just documentation. I understood the first time," he said. He was out of the building soon after. He stood on the sidewalk outside Meridian Tower's side entrance, the entrance Edwin had used to come in, and he stood there for a moment, breathing the cold air and looking up at the building's east face. He had done his job correctly. He had documented everything. He had a note in his personnel file. He started walking. Layla was at the kitchen table when he got home, supposedly doing homework but actually watching the door. Edwin was in the living room reading a book Layla had pulled from the shelf for him, something about urban planning, a topic he had expressed interest in after Layla had shown him a documentary. He looked up when Desmond came in. "How was it?" Layla asked. "Fine," Desmond said. He hung his coat. "Documentation meeting. Routine." Layla's eyes moved over her father's face the way they always did. The inventory. The assessment. "You are tired," she said. Not a question. "A little? Do you want me to make dinner?" Desmond looked at his daughter, a teenager with a structural defect in her heart and more common sense than most adults he knew, and the specific capacity to see through her father's composure without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be. "Yeah," he said. "That would be good." Layla got up. Edwin sat down his book. "I can help," he offered. "You can sit there and supervise," Layla said. "That is your official role in this kitchen." Edwin settled back into the couch. "I accept the terms," he said. Desmond went to change his clothes, and when he came back, the kitchen was warm and slightly chaotic and smelled like garlic. And he sat at the table and let himself be fed. And maybe that is the part of the story that stays with us the longest. Not the money, not the buildings, not even the miracle in the operating room, but the quiet decision on an ordinary freezing night to open a door instead of closing one. If you have been carrying something heavy lately, a bill, a diagnosis, a loneliness no one else can see, I hope you will let this be your reminder to pause, breathe, rest your heart for a moment. You never know which small kindness might be the beam that holds everything up. If this story touched you, I would love to hear where you were while listening, or what part felt closest to your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments. This space is for you. And if you would like more stories like this, please like and subscribe. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending your time with us. In the midst of life's harshest storms, we often discover that the most powerful force in the world is the simplest one: genuine human kindness. In the story of Desmond Hayes, a devoted security guard fighting desperately to save his daughter Layla's failing heart, and the confused elderly Edwin Hargrove he brought home from a freezing Chicago night, we witness this truth in its purest form. Desmond didn't see wealth or status that night. He saw only a lost soul who needed warmth and dignity. Without hesitation, he opened his modest home and his heart, offering shelter, patience, and respect to a complete stranger. What unfolded was nothing short of beautiful. Through quiet conversations, shared meals, and patient understanding, walls came down, wisdom was passed between generations, and a fragile family found unexpected strength and hope. This story teaches us a deeply emotional lesson. The smallest acts of compassion, given without expectation of reward, can become the very beams that hold our lives together when everything else feels like it's falling apart. True kindness costs us comfort and time, yet it returns far more than it takes, restoring faith, healing old wounds, and reminding us that we are all connected in ways we cannot always see. If you're carrying a heavy burden right now, let this be your reminder that your quiet choices to be kind still matter more than you know. Tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced or witnessed a simple act of kindness that changed everything? I read every single story you share. And if these heartfelt tales move you, please hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Your support truly keeps this channel alive. Thank you for being here with us.